Welcome to the Backyard Professor Esoteric Studies. Tonight, we're going to do a deep dive into infinity. Not difficult, deep. And I'm going to discuss a chapter in this book by David Haight, The Scandal of Reason, or The Shadow of God. And as you can see, I have read this book several times. I have just about wore it out. I have to put duct tape on the spine to hold it together. I have had to tape the middle of it is blown out, so I had to tape several pages back together. I have taken notes. I have made my own very involved, detailed index in the front of the book over the table of contents in the book because this book is one of the truly great books I have ever read. My notes even spill over into the preface because their index is quite good, but they're always inadequate. And I have cross-referenced several different, here's some of the inside pages. I have cross-referenced several different texts, ideas, notes, comments, and it has been a tremendous inspiration to me through the years. Tonight I want to discuss chapter 7, Mathematics and the Good. And I will share, I began trying to write this up years ago when I got through this book, I think like for the third time, and I got wrapped up in other stuff and it was so complex. I found that along with some other studies on the infinite that I was working on, and I have now been able to upgrade it, to complete it more or less. There will probably be a part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to this. This one is going to be, this first one on the infinite is the introduction. It is the overarching ideas involved with the infinite that I believe point us to an astonishing conclusion. The whole book does this for us. I would recommend getting the book. It is not an easy read. It is a worthy read. This is one you think as you read. You don't just speed read this one. No. And I didn't. So let's get started, and I will share with you my thoughts and ideas on the mathematics and the good. So this chapter 7, is about how mathematics, when pushed to its limits, turns into philosophy and even into spirituality. The author David Haight, in his book Scandal of Reason, of which I will discuss in this lecture, shows that the deepest truths of math, like infinity, self-reference, and the harmony of proportions, actually points toward the same mysteries that Plato called the good, or the unity behind all things. Infinity in the whole, the reason we can speak of this is because the mathematician George Cantor, he discovered that there isn't just one infinity, that there are actually different sizes of infinity, which is incredible. He called the biggest one the absolute infinite, which he saw as another name for God. And Haight says that this absolute infinite is like the whole universe of all sets, something that includes everything, even itself. We'll get into that. But this makes it mysterious because if it does include everything, how can it include itself? See, that's a puzzle logic can't solve. So, like Plato's good, it's beyond ordinary existence, it's beyond being. Well, the universe as a whole isn't a single object among others. It's the living wholeness that gives meaning to everything else. So, on this theme of self reference and wholeness, to understand reality, you can't look at parts in isolation. You must see how the whole reflects itself in every single part. And there are trillions and trillions of parts. Think of a hologram or a fractal pattern. If you break it into pieces, each piece still contains the whole image. The universe, the mind, and even numbers work like that. The idea is called self-reflexivity or self-similarity. Each thing mirrors the entire order that it comes from. And this is how infinity behaves as well. A set is infinite if it can be matched to one of its own parts, like all even numbers put to a one-to-one correspondence with all numbers. So infinity means wholeness that repeats within itself. Hate connects this math to Plato's good. Just as the infinite includes everything without excluding anything, the good gives meaning to everything without being one thing among others. So math becomes a way to glimpse spiritual truth. And that's interesting. The same rule that holds for sets and numbers, self-reflection and proportion. They also describe how being and consciousness actually work. This turns math into kind of like a sacred mirror of existence. We come to Gödel, paradox and the limits of reason. Now, Kurt Gödel, he proved that in any mathematical system, there will always be truths that can't be proven within that system. This means reason can never close itself off perfectly. It always points beyond itself. That's the scandal of reason. To be complete, thought must go past logic into something like intuition or transcendence. So pure logic actually forces us toward the same mystery that mystics talk about, the leap beyond proof. I'll share some ideas on that too. So we come to the golden ratio in mathematics, spirals, and the cosmic number 137. Hate dives into something breathtaking. This is the connection between the golden ratio, which is 1.618 on forever in a non-repeating decimal, the Fibonacci sequence, and the mysterious number 137, the fine structure constant in physics. He also does bring in Planck's constant as well. Well, the fine structure constant is the main one because this controls how electrons move around atoms. And it also controls how light interacts actually with material, with matter. Many scientists, Einstein, Feynman, Pauli, they were amazed by it. No one knows why this number rules atomic structure. It's like a cosmic key. Haidt says 137 is the same ratio that appears in spirals, shells, galaxies, and even the pattern of leaves and flowers. That's the Fibonacci spiral. So nature and mind and mathematics all hum to the same rhythm. He links this to Plato's idea of the golden spiral, the perfect curve that repeats itself endlessly, combining beauty, balance, and infinity in one shape. It's on the cover of this book, the golden spiral with all those stars in it. And this is also a beautiful little book. That's the golden spiral. It is as if the entire universe is a living golden spiral. It's self-referring, it's self-organizing, it's also self-aware. Science as a mirror of spirit. Now, here's the main idea. We take physics and math and philosophy, and we recognize that they are not separate. Planck's constant deals with the quantum of energy. He discovered that energy is not a continuous flow like a river, but it comes in little discrete points, pieces, chunks. He called it quanta, and that just shocked the physics world. Einstein's speed of light, coupled with Planck's constant and the number 137, the fine structure constant, these all describe the same deep harmony, the link between light and energy and matter. These constants are like musical notes in the symphony of creation. Haidt calls this unity the music of the atomic spheres. It's what Kepler and Pythagoras dreamed of when they spoke of the music of the spheres. So now we get to something that has to occur when we begin to investigate the infinite. Because we live in duality, but the infinite does not behave by the same rules or logic. So we have to use a fourfold logic instead of the classic Aristotelian logic of the excluded middle. And to explain the mystery of unity and opposites, Haidt uses an idea from Plato's Parmenides, and even the number, the square root of -1, that's the imaginary unit. Normally, math separates positive and negative, true and false, something and nothing, right? When we get to the deepest level, those opposites turn into each other. Just like 1 and -1 meet in the imaginary plane of mathematics. So Haidt proposes a fourfold logic that goes beyond true or false. And here is the logic. Not true, not false, both true and false, neither true nor false. Those are the 4 points of fourfold logic. This matches the way being and non-being interlace in existence. The whole universe is both real and unreal. It's both finite and infinite, just as the square root of -1 is both impossible and essential in mathematics. We're getting to the deep ground here. The self-referential universe. What's the idea here? Finally, everything loops back to where it began. Reality itself is a self-referential loop, what philosophers call the self-referential loop. Light measures light, universe reflects upon itself, the mind observes itself, being knows being, reflexive, self-reflexive. This is the golden spiral of consciousness. The endless turning of the one, becoming the many, and then returning to one. So mathematics, far from being cold and abstract, this is the language of divine self-recognition. The patterns of numbers and spirals and ratios show how the cosmos and even human thought mirror the spiral order of the good. It mirrors the infinite order of the good. So in simple terms, the universe is mathematical, but math itself is spiritual. Infinity, the golden ratio, and the number 137 are keys to the unity of all things. Logic and reason point beyond themselves to something higher. Call it the good, the infinite, the one, whatever. And every part of reality reflects the whole, just like fractals, spirals, or mirrors inside mirrors. Science and mysticism meet in the same pattern, the pattern of self-reflection, harmony, and proportion. So the electrifying core idea in Haight's chapter is this. We have the universe, from atoms to galaxies, from logic to love, is a single self-referring harmony. A divine mathematics where the whole sees itself in every part. This is the part that blows my mind. You have golden ratios. You have spirals, and you have the cosmic number 137. And then the chapter dives into something breathtaking. The connection between the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, and the mysterious number 137, called the fine structure constant in physics. When you put all of that together, now the number 137 controls how electrons move around atoms and how light interacts with matter. So it's on a really, really, really small scale, right? And many scientists, Einstein, Pauli, Feynman, they were amazed at it. No one knows why this number rules atomic structure at all. It's like a cosmic key. The author says 137 is the same ratio that appears in spiral shells, galaxies, leaves, so on and so forth. So nature, mind, and math all hum to the same rhythm. This is the golden spiral. Science is a mirror of spirit with this idea. Physics, math, and philosophy are not separate. Planck's constant, which is quantum energy in the atomic place, Einstein's speed of light, and the number 137 all describe the link between light energy and matter. That is the key to this. Here are some of the pieces of evidence that support the idea that Haight pointed to, the linkage of the golden ratio, the spirals, and the cosmic number 137, and how they appear in nature and in math and in physics. The golden ratio and Fibonacci in nature. The Fibonacci sequence is you begin with 0 and you take two numbers and you add them up. 0 and 1 is 1. Then you go back one number and you go 1 and 1 is 2. Then 2 and 1 is 3. 3 and 2 is 5, so on and so forth. It's well defined. Each term is the sum of the two terms before it. The golden ratio is connected. If you divide successive Fibonacci numbers, you approach the golden ratio, phi. And yes, many natural patterns seem to approximate spirals or growth patterns that point to either Fibonacci or the golden ratio structure. Sunflower seed heads, pine cones, leaf arrangements. So the link between spiral and growth in nature and the Fibonacci golden ratio, that's plausible. And it has some pretty good, robust evidence. The fine structure constant is a dimensionless constant in physics that measures the strength of the electromagnetic interaction with electrons in the atom. And Richard Feynman and other physicists have noted, why is this number this value? We just don't know. And it shows up in many equations, but its deeper origin remains unknown. That's what makes it so fascinating. And interestingly enough, if there were just very small changes in this number, it would alter chemistry, it would alter atoms, and likely life. So it's argued as one of the fine-tuned constants of the universe. So we have a philosophical and a mathematical interpretation of this. And this gets us back to these ideas, the self-reference, the infinite sets, the fractals, the spirals, the part reflecting the whole. This is a recurring theme in advanced mathematics and philosophy, sets that include themselves, George Cantor's diagonal argument. If you've read George Cantor, you'll understand how that demonstrated infinities, etc. So Haidt uses that structure to build a metaphysical meaning of it all. He links the math, the physics, and metaphysics so that these constants and spirals and ratios become symbols of the greater good or the unity. For example, the golden spiral is seen as a growth pattern, and it does actually repeat in ever larger and ever smaller scales. It's a metaphor for the whole in the part is what it is. It's a visual metaphor that we can actually see. This matches fractal notions as well as recursion. So the fine structure constant being dimensionless, unitless, it means it's the same no matter what the measuring system. And that gives it a special kind of universality. So what remains uncertain and why we should keep searching? Here are the caveats. Looking into this, why the linkage of all these things into a grand metaphysical unity is not yet settled fact, but it rather is a compelling hypothesis, because correlation does not equal proof of unity. We need to keep that in mind without question. Just because we find the golden ratio in nature, and it is somewhat approximate, this doesn't automatically prove a metaphysical unity or a cosmic plan. Let's keep it real. Many patterns are approximate, and some claimed examples are certainly debated. For instance, the golden ratio in human facial proportions, that has weak evidence. The fine structure constant is indeed mysterious, but physicists don't know why it has that value yet. Its deep meaning is still open, therefore, and that means we can propose in a controlled fashion some extensive ideas of its meaning, which we will do. So we're mixing scales and metaphors. The golden ratio is a geometrical mathematical pattern in space growth, in spirals, things like that. The fine structure constant is a quantum physics parameter about forces and particles. Okay. Bridging them is beautiful, but requires careful justification. Some claim the universe is a golden spiral. So ideas lean toward more poetic metaphor. It's fine as metaphor, but as rigorous science philosophy, we need clear derivation, not just pattern spotting. So we don't have direct mathematical derivation yet, but with infinity, that is irrelevant anyway, as we're going to see tonight. We have the risk of overinterpretation. Scholars, of course, caution about attributing too much to the golden ratio in nature, and I am in complete agreement with them. Many supposed perfect examples turn out to be approximate, for instance. The number 137 significance is real in physics, but linking it to all the spirals and macrocosmic design, well, that's still speculative. But it increases dramatically as we approach the philosophy of infinity, as we'll see. So, what is viable and real? It's a good hypothesis that all of these connect to form a very interesting philosophical, metaphysical interpretation of the universe. as a hypothesis with strong fragments of support. And no, we shouldn't stop looking, because the constants and the patterns, they are real. The golden ratio is real. The Fibonacci patterns in nature, those are real. The fine structure constant is real, and it is deeply meaningful in physics. So the why behind them, the why do they connect, and what do they mean metaphysically? Well, we are not yet answered in those questions. That's the frontier of science and philosophy. That's where we're heading to tonight. We are going to approach it. But first, we have to lay a groundwork. So, Haidt is pointing to a grander unity. He says math, physics, consciousness, metaphysics. Then we are standing at the border. So, we're going to go deep. And we are going to go to the border of the known and the unknown. And that's where the exciting search happens. So, now, we can't help but wonder about the connection between the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, and the number 137. Has it been verified mathematically? Is Haidt correct in proposing this? This is where it gets juicy and subtle. The short answer is no. The connection between the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence and the fine structure constant has not been verified mathematically or physically. But the reason that it keeps showing up in writing, like in Haidt's chapter, is because the numerical coincidences are intriguingly close, and people have tried for decades to find a deeper link, and Haidt might be one of those who has found that deeper link. So let's unpack this carefully so that we understand what's real, what's symbolic, and what is still open speculation. Phi, the golden ratio. Phi, the golden ratio. Alpha, the fine structure constant, which measures the strength of the electromagnetic force. The golden ratio is the limit of the Fibonacci ratios. And it comes from pure geometry. Alpha, the fine structure constant, it measures the strength of the electromagnetic force, which is utterly fascinating. And that comes from physics, atoms. And the Fibonacci sequence, the recursive series, phi as the ratio limit is its value, and it comes from pure arithmetic recurrence. Notice that they come from entirely different domains. Phi is from geometry and recursion. Alpha is from quantum electrodynamics, QED. So where the connection comes from, they come numerically close to 137 in various algebraic combinations. There's been a lot of playing around with this. And so mathematically, these are curve-fitting coincidences. You can juggle pi and phi and the number E, and you can find many near matches because 137 is not an extreme number, right? It lies in the range produced by many simple expressions. So far as we know, there's no known physical derivation that shows that alpha arises from phi or the Fibonacci structure. So Richard Feynman, who helped build QED, famously said it's been a mystery ever since it was discovered. It's a magic number that comes with no understanding by man. Wolfgang Pauli was fascinated by Jungian symbolism and numerology, and he personally wondered if 137 had deeper significance, but that was metaphysical curiosity, not physics, right? So modern physics sees alpha as emerging from charge, electrical charge. Planck's constant and the speed of light, all of these are measurable quantities, but there's no golden ratio in that formula. So what they say, the sequence, the Fibonacci, and phi are fully explained by linear recursion and quadratic equations. There's no trace of alpha because alpha involves dimensionless physical constants, not arithmetic ratios. So any connection that phi and alpha have would come from a deeper theory of everything. that explains why all of the constants and ratios have the values they do. And we'll explore that a little bit. And then the string theorists, the loop quantum gravity theorists, and the symmetry researchers have occasionally explored this, but no peer-reviewed derivation links alpha to phi. So what is Haidt doing in linking them then? Is he being just a silly boy? No, not even close. He is seriously engaging in metaphorical synthesis, not mathematical derivation. He and the other authors are saying the same form of harmony and proportion and self-similarity and recursion that the golden ratio embodies in math and nature, that might also underlie the constants of physics. That's philosophically valid as a metaphor of unity, but not scientifically proven. It's a viable option as poetry and metaphysics, not as confirmed physics. That we have to keep in mind. But since this does take us to infinity and even physics has a limit, it's irrelevant whether it's confirmed in physics as such. That doesn't matter. It's not about being physically proven in physics, since it is one of those things that leads us to infinity, which physics itself cannot measure or handle. So we're going to move beyond physics in this discussion. So we don't need its approval to see the linkage of these constants. Now, Planck's constant is at the quantum threshold. This defines the smallest quantum of action, is what he called it, the least action, the unit that links energy and frequency. It's the bridge between energy and vibration. So it's very small. Haidt and other metaphysical interpreters seize on that, and they say the universe is not made of stuff, but of vibration that has been quantified by an invisible constant. And this gets important. It is the limit that makes energy discreteness actually possible. And it's a very small unit. It's the threshold between continuity and countability. So in Haidt's logic, Planck's constant is the mathematical symbol of the boundary between the infinite continuum and the finite quantum, the meeting of transcendence and manifestation. It is the quantum of action, the boundary between the continuous and the discrete. So the symbol of the infinite self-limiting into countable events is what the Planck's constant is. This is the heartbeat of manifestation. Every photon, every atom, every vibration is quantized by the same pulse. So when we look at Einstein's speed of light, well, this is considered the maximum speed of any causal influence. It embodies the finite horizon of relativity. No signal can outrun the speed of light. So that's the limit. Metaphorically, it's the measure of relationship itself. Every interaction is a dance of light-bound timing. So how does it join the golden ratio and alpha, the 137? Haidt ties three constants together as a trinity of proportion. This is quite amazing. H is Planck's constant, the quantization of energy, the grain of the universe. The speed of light is the universal limit of motion, the measure of relationality. And alpha, the 137, is the measure of how light and matter interact. So Haidt notes that alpha can be written in terms of the charge of an electron and vacuum permittivity, and he gives the numbers. So this mysterious cosmic number 137 is what we're looking at is a ratio, not a number, but a ratio built out of the quantum Planck constant and the relativistic speed of light. What we have is quantization and limit. So in his symbolism, that's the marriage of finite discreteness, Planck, and infinite continuum, Einstein's relativity, the speed of light. The same pattern as the golden ratio. Finite and infinite in self-referential harmony. So, this is the harmony constant that keeps atoms stable. This is the cosmic ratio in Haidt's discussion. It is a physical echo of the golden mean, and the golden mean is where light and quantum meet in perfect proportion. Now, what is he doing philosophically? Haidt is not claiming hidden numerology. No. He's showing that modern physics is full of metaphysical thresholds. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so each constant marks a limit condition. It is not forever. It has a limit. It's conditional. This is the place where measurement stops and the unmeasurable begins. So H is the limit of divisibility in nature. It is the smallest in energy. It is the smallest piece of energy in existence. That's Planck's constant. C is the limit of speed, the horizon of space-time, and A is the limit of stability in atomic structure. This is what he calls the music of the atomic spheres, ratios that allow the universe to exist at all. So, why this matters? Even if it's not proven, and it's not, it's symbolically powerful. The golden ratio describes how the finite approximates the infinite through proportion. The fine structure constant describes how matter and light interact through quantized proportion. So in spirit, both are about relationship, balance, and resonance. One in number and the other one in nature. That's why this chapter in The Scandal of Reason feels stunning. It poetically senses a unity that physics still cannot mathematically show, but it's still there. So the deepest idea beneath all the math and the symbolism and all the gobbledygook is that the infinite and the finite are not separate, but they mirror one another in a paradoxical, self-reflexive way. So here's the big question. Here is what he is asking. How can the infinite, that which includes everything, have any relationship to the finite things inside it? If the infinite contains all things, it should include even the idea of not being infinite. But that's a contradiction. If the infinite excludes anything, it's no longer infinite. So the infinite must include even what seems to oppose it, namely finitude, limitation, particularity, and difference. This is the amazing paradox that runs through his entire chapter, and he shows it. We're going to explore this. So we have two levels, the finite and the infinite. In mathematics, this paradox actually appears in logic and set theory. A finite set can be counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to a number, right? So finite numbers can be counted. An infinite set can't be completed, but we can still describe the pattern of the infinite set, like all whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, continuing forever. And then he quotes Dedekind's idea. A system is infinite if it can be mapped one-to-one with a proper part of itself. So the set of all even numbers is smaller than the set of all whole numbers, yet you can pair them up. 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 3 to 6, 4 to 8. That means the infinite whole and its proper part are structurally equal. In other words, they're self-similar. So mathematically, the infinite contains itself in each of its parts. Each finite thing is like a reflection or an echo of the infinite. That's the start of the philosophical bridge into this whole thing. Self-reference is the mirror principle. Whoops. So we're going to move from math to metaphysics. When you try to speak of the totality of everything, language collapses into self-reference. For instance, you end up saying stuff like the set of all sets or being itself, and this includes the very act of saying them. So that's what philosophers call reflexivity. The thing includes its own description. That's what we're dealing with. He uses this to claim that the infinite is also self-reflective. It contains not only all things, but also the act of containing, and even the awareness of being all containing. That's why he says logic folds back on itself at the highest level, just as a circle closes its own curve. So we're dealing with inclusion and exclusion. This is the paradox of wholeness, and this is incredible. To be infinite, nothing can be excluded. But to mean anything, something must be excluded. Otherwise, everything would blur together. He explores this using set theory again. If you define the set of all sets that are not members of themselves, then you get a contradiction. That's Bertrand Russell's paradox. If you try to define the universe of all sets, it can't be a set. It's something beyond sets. So, the infinite both includes and excludes at once. Includes all finite beings in order to be whole, and it excludes itself from them in order to remain beyond them. That's the paradox of the infinite. It must both contain and transcend the finite. Now, Haidt connects this to Plato's good, that which gives being and meaning to all things, but cannot itself be a thing. So let's look at the finite as an expression of the infinite. Hate's resolution is not to solve the paradox, but to see it as essential to reality. Now, this is profound. Don't solve the paradox. He says the infinite finitizes itself by degrees. That means it manifests as finite things, members, forms, creatures, minds, while never ceasing to be infinite. Every finite form is a reflection of the infinite pattern, just as each small spiral repeats the shape of the larger one in a seashell or in a galaxy. So instead of an opposition, he sees a continuum. Infinity manifests finite patterns which mirror infinity again. That's why he loves the image of spirals and fractals. They show how the same pattern appears at every scale. If you've ever looked at the Mandelbrot sets, if you haven't, look them up. They're never ending and never beginning at every scale. So here we get to the logic of both and. We leave the classical logic of Aristotle, either or, alone. Now we get to the logic of both and. In ordinary logic, something is either true or false. This is what we were raised on. But at the level of infinity, the boundaries collapse. That brings a problem. Hate argues for a fourfold logic: true, false, both true and false, neither true nor false. That's how you describe paradoxes, like the infinite includes itself. It's both possible and impossible. This both and way of thinking lets him hold unity and multiplicity together. So the spiritual meaning, he then applies this structure to being itself. The infinite is pure wholeness. It's the source, the good, God, the all, whatever. It's pure wholeness. The finite is the world, the many forms of that source of pure wholeness. So their relationship is self-reflection. The universe is the infinite, seeing itself through trillions of countless finite mirrors. That's why he says mathematics becomes a sacred language. It reveals how form and number are the infinite's way of expressing itself. For hate, the paradox isn't a problem to fix. It's the very beauty of existence, the infinite forever unfolding into finitude, and the finite forever pointing back to infinity. It's quite a vision. So in one sentence, the infinite expresses itself in the finite without losing its infinitude. Every finite thing is a doorway back into the infinite. Inclusion through exclusion, wholeness through division. Now, why this feels electrifying? Because hate turns the abstract language of set theory and paradox and mathematics into a metaphysical vision. A universe that is self-referential, self-similar, self-aware, a living infinite expressing itself through finite forms. That's the deep logic behind his fascination with Cantor and Dedekind and Plato, with his love of the fine structure constant. Every domain, math, matter, mind, shows the same reflexive unity. So is the fourfold logic valid? What we're trying to do is we're trying to grapple with paradoxes, right? And especially paradoxes of the infinite. So is this fourfold logic valid, though? That's exactly the kind of question philosophers and mathematicians wrestle with when they deal with self-reference and infinity. So we want to know, is Haidt using the fourfold logic, true, false, both, neither, as valid, or is this just a rhetorical move on his part? When we look, we find, yes, it's real, and it actually is historically grounded. It is a historically grounded system of logic. And granted, it's not part of the classical logic, but it can't be, because that's Aristotelian. Aristotle didn't deal with infinity logically like we have to. It's used precisely to handle paradoxes like those involving the infinite, or the idea of self-reference, and being non-being. But it's not universally accepted. It's an alternative logic developed in philosophy and mathematics, and even in theology, to address what ordinary two-value logic can't address. So it's irrelevant if it's not aligned with classical logic from Aristotle, because that logic isn't valid when we discuss infinity. So it's not a matter of matching this logic with Aristotle's. We don't have to worry about that. It's finding out how to understand infinity, and this logic does that. So in the classical Aristotelian logic, any proposition, P, must be either true or false. Never both, right? This is called the law of the excluded middle. But certain statements, especially self-referential or infinite ones, they break that rule. For example, this statement is false. If it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. So in order for us to get a grasp on paradoxes like this, thinkers in several traditions developed non-classical logics that allow for or more truth values, right? So Haidt is using that as a philosophical key to understand the infinite. That's what we're seeing here. Because the infinite includes what's excluded, and it transcends its own opposites. So, the Buddhist logic, the tetralemma, the fourfold scheme, actually goes back 2,000 years to Nagarjuna, 2nd century of the Common Era, the founder of the Madhyamaka school of Buddhist philosophy. He uses a system called the Chatushkoti, the four corners, which says that for any statement P, there are four possibilities. P is true, P is false, P is both true and false, P is neither true or false. He used it to show that ultimate reality, which he said was emptiness, sunyata, this transcends all conceptual categories. So any finite statement about the infinite is both true and false at once, depending on the level of analysis you do it on. So when Haidt invokes a fourfold logic for the infinite, he's standing squarely in that tradition, though it's translated through Western mathematical language instead of through Buddha metaphysics, right? So there are Western parallels. Hegel used it in The Science of Logic. Nicholas of Cusa in the 1400s used it, the coincidence of opposites. Niels Bohr in physics in the 20th century used it in the principle of complementarity. And there's a paraconsistent and dialetheist logician movement that uses it. They actually use model paradoxes like the liar, this statement is false, and set theory paradoxes like Russell's. So why does this fourfold logic, though, fit the infinite? In the realm of the infinite, inclusion and exclusion, identity and difference cannot be separated cleanly. For instance, the infinite includes itself. Well, that's self-reference, and that equals both true and false. The infinite transcends itself, and that leads to neither true nor false in the finite sense. So this is why we have to get involved with this logic. So mathematically and philosophically, the infinite forces us out of Aristotle's two-valued logic. So we have a four-valued. Now, Cantor himself said that the absolute is beyond the mathematical infinite, not inside any consistent system. It's beyond it all. And Kurt Gödel, he was the logician mathematician. He later proved that any consistent system can't prove all truths about itself. And what that means is truth itself spills out beyond the system. That's the logical mirror of Haight's infinite finitized paradox. That's interesting. This prevents contradictions from exploding the system. Instead of everything becomes true, contradictions are contained and informative in this fourfold logic. That's how logicians handle paradoxical objects like the set of all sets that are not members of themselves. So, is it accurate? Yes, conceptually and historically. It's not mainstream classical logic, but it is recognized in advanced philosophy, mathematical logic, and Buddhist metaphysics. So when it's used to discuss infinity, self-reference, and metaphysical unity, it's one of the most appropriate tools available. Haight is absolutely within a legitimate lineage of thinkers who concluded that the infinite can only be grasped through a logic that transcends opposites and opposition. That's a very important key to understanding this. So the purpose. Fourfold logic does not replace classical logic at all. That's not the point. It shows that the infinite is not logically resolvable within finite categories. It's a cognitive bridge, is what we're seeing here. It's a way to think without collapsing the paradox. In other words, it's not illogical, it's translogical. And that's an important point to understand. It's logic expanded to include the limits of logic itself. That's what this is. So Haight's fourfold logic is philosophically valid and historically grounded. It has been used by Nagarjuna and Cusa and Hegel and the modern dialecticists. It's accurate as a tool for describing paradoxes of the infinite, as long as you understand that it's not classical logic. This is logic at the boundary where reason meets its own mirror. So let's pause and wonder if the whole must be quantitatively greater than the sum of the parts. Now that's wild, but it's the right understanding, isn't it? Let's take a look. In ordinary thinking, the whole is equal to the sum of its parts. In basic arithmetic or physical aggregation, this feels obvious. 3 apples and 2 apples is 5 apples. Each part contributes a countable portion. That's additive logic. We assume the whole is exactly what you get when you put the parts together. Okay, that makes sense. But that only works when the parts are independent and when they don't change by being together. In systems, life, and infinity, something new happens. When parts interact, the whole acquires properties that the parts don't have individually. And we have some interesting examples. 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom separately are gases that can be put on fire. They burn. But when you combine them, you get liquid water that would put them out. The whole has new properties, wetness and cohesion. Interesting, huh? In physics, the gravitational field of 2 bodies is not the sum of their individual fields. It's shaped by their relationships. In consciousness, individual neurons fire, sure, but awareness emerges from their network, not from a single firing. So even before metaphysics, science shows that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts as a principle of emergence. And there's whole books written on this, truly. So in mathematics and the infinite, the paradox sharpens. In set theory, Cantor discovered something stranger still. A line, you draw a line on a piece of paper. It's a continuum. It contains infinitely many points. A plane, like a whole flat piece of paper, contains infinitely many lines, and a cube, a 3-dimensional structure, contains infinitely many planes, yet all of them have the same cardinality. In other words, the same number of points. Now that's a fun paradox. The whole, a cube, is not arithmetically larger than a line, although it feels greater in dimension, right? So Cantor's paradox of infinity revealed that the part and the whole can be equinumerous, that is, equal numerously. They contain each other's structure, but the universe of all sets, in other words, the truly infinite whole, cannot be a set at all. It transcends that category entirely. That's what Haidt means by quantitatively greater. The infinite whole is not just a bigger sum. No, it's a different order of magnitude and meaning. It's a level of being that the parts participate in but cannot exhaust. So there are philosophical parallels here. This has been echoed in philosophy for centuries. Aristotle's metaphysics. The whole is something besides the parts and not merely their sum. Plotinus in the 3rd century of the Common Era. The one is everywhere complete and yet is everywhere beyond. Nicholas of Cusa. In the infinite, the maximum and the minimum coincide. So every part both is and is not the whole. And then Hegel, the totality is self-relating. The parts are what they are only through the whole. Thus, the whole is qualitatively and quantitatively greater. So Haidt is in powerful company. It's very interesting. Why this must be so, though, for infinity? Let's look at this. This is a high-level logic problem we're going to solve here. Or at least come to understand. If the infinite is the sum of all finite parts, it would itself be finite, because sum implies a countable limit, right? So the infinite must include more than the collection, namely the act of inclusion itself. The act is not another part, but it is a meta relation that binds the parts into unity. The whole, the infinite, therefore, is greater than the sum because it contains both the parts and their relations. So the infinite isn't merely all things added up. No, it's the law of relationship, the living patterns that make any sum possible. That's what Plato called the good. The organizing principle that both transcends and includes all. So it is quantitatively greater, but what does that mean? Quantitatively greater here doesn't mean more pieces. It means the whole has a higher order of measure. It's a dimension or a cardinality that the parts can't reach. For example, countable infinity 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way out, non ending. You have the countable infinity. Uncountable infinity is all points on a line, and that's a larger infinity quantitatively. There's more than not by addition, but by the power of relation. Haidt applies that analogy to being itself. The infinite whole, the being as such, is a higher cardinality of existence than all finite beings combined. So it can't be summed, it grounds summation. That's how that works. So here's the spiritual punch to this. And it's why it feels so electrifying, because it means that the universe is not a heap of atoms. It's a living pattern where each finite thing reflects the infinite whole. That's why the mystics say, and they mean it, and they're right, you are the universe. Every part belongs to something that exceeds the arithmetic of addition. This is the essence of holism. Wholeness is creative, not cumulative. So, another way to put this in short, the whole must be greater than the sum of its parts. All right. Not because it contains more stuff, but because it contains the relationships and the self-reflection that make parts exist at all. The infinite whole includes the act of inclusion itself. That's why it transcends all counting, all measure, and all division. Only in transcendence is there a wholeness in infinity. So we now have to ask, well, what does transcendence mean? Okay, let's go. Transcendence isn't somewhere else. That's not what it means. It means beyond the limits of any one system or category. So every finite system, a set, a physical object, a theory, even the mind, is self-contained until it refers to the whole of which it's a part. So when it does that, when it becomes self-aware or self-inclusive, it crosses a boundary. That leap beyond the frame is transcendence. So, transcendence is the act of the finite opening itself toward the infinite. And why infinity requires transcendence? Well, infinity cannot be contained within anything finite, not even within the sum of all finite things. To be infinite, it must overflow every attempt to grasp it. So what does that mean? Well, no object is infinite by itself. No addition of objects reaches infinity. You can't just start adding numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can add them at 100 quadrillion per second and never get to infinity because you can't count up to infinity. Addition of objects does not reach infinity. Infinity can only be present through an act of surpassing. That is transcendence. That outstrips the finite domain. So it's a leap. That's why the infinite can't be defined, only approached. And the approach itself, that going beyond, is the infinite in motion. So the paradox of inclusion and beyond is really interesting. So in Haidt's system, the infinite both includes everything and it transcends everything. This is the essence of the paradox. If it only included, it would be a closed total. But that's just a gigantic finitude. Even if it's quadrillions of light years large, it's still just a gigantic finite. So that doesn't work if it only included. But if it only transcended, it would be aloof. It would actually be irrelevant. It would be elsewhere. So instead, it's both. The infinite includes through transcending. So, yes, only by transcending can the whole be whole. That's why the infinite is self-reflexive. It includes its own act of going beyond. So what this means is the infinite is not the totality of what is, but it's the wholeness that remains whole while it surpasses itself. And we have a mathematical analogy. Cantor's hierarchy of infinities. The first infinity, then the second order infinity, then the second to the second order infinity, then the third to the second. This shows the idea in mathematical form. Each level of infinity is included in the next. No level exhausts the infinity. You have an infinity of infinities, and the sequence never ends. It transcends itself endlessly. That endless transcendence is the mathematical image of the metaphysical truth. Wholeness exists only in the infinite's power to surpass every finite limit. So, wow, this idea has deep roots. Plato, the good, is beyond being, and yet it's the cause of all being. Only in going beyond the world of forms does one find the form of forms, right? And Plotinus said, the one is all things and no one of them. Transcendence is not outside the world, but the world's inner source of unity. Kusa said, the infinite circle includes every line, every angle, the transcendent unity where opposites meet. The absolute is transcending spirit, according to Hegel. Reality realizing itself through contradiction and reconciliation. It includes all of its opposites while continuing to transcend them all. So modern physics and consciousness studies. So here we have something interesting that might help us grasp this deep stuff. Light is both a particle and a wave. It transcends the categories that's used to describe it. So consciousness can observe itself, the knower and the known, fuse into self-reflexivity. So hate stands in a long chain of thinkers who all say that wholeness appears only at the level of transcendence, where inclusion and beyond coincide. And this is why the image of the spiral is so helpful. A spiral is never closed like a circle, and yet it's never open to chaos. It repeats its pattern at every level, endlessly expanding, either larger and larger and larger, or smaller and smaller and smaller. And yet, it's a finite form with infinite motion. So each turn of the spiral transcends the previous one, yet it remains part of the same pattern. That's transcendence as wholeness made visible. So that's a great image. That's a great symbol. So in one line, infinity is not a quantity, but an act. It is the act of transcendence that holds all finitude within itself. And because that act is ceaseless, its wholeness is never static. It's a living wholeness. It's a dynamic unity. And that's why in Haidt's worldview, mathematics and physics and consciousness all reflect the same motion. The equations of physics point beyond themselves. Thought discovers truths it can't fully prove, according to Gödel. Every finite being yearns beyond itself toward the whole. So in simple terms, the infinite is whole only because it forever transcends its own limits. It is the wholeness of unending self-surpassing. Because it keeps including more and more and more and more and more. It keeps surpassing more and more and more and more and more. So that's what he means. And yes, it's pretty wild. But it's also one of the most luminous ideas in all of philosophy. And yet, if Gödel is correct, transcendence can't be proven either. So is metaphysics actual, or is this just in our imaginations? You know, I got thinking about this. All right, hold it. I've got to look into this. We have a logic and a math for physics, but those won't work with transcendence or infinity. So are we just making stuff up? If Gödel showed that any system is incomplete, and he did, any formal math system, see, I'm kind of getting sloppy here. I wrote it down wrong. Does that make transcendence unprovable? So if so, is metaphysics only our imagination? And if math and logic fail at infinity, are we just making things up? So here we go. Here's what Gödel actually proved. 1931, he says, any formal system rich enough to describe arithmetic will contain true statements that cannot be proven inside the system itself. So, to prove those true statements, you must step outside the system, build a larger one that can talk about the first system. You have to transcend the system to prove those true statements about that system. That step outside, well, that's kind of a transcendence in the logical sense. It doesn't mean we can't know anything. It means knowledge always points beyond itself. That's important. So Gödel didn't close the door. He proved there must always be another door. And that's incredibly important. There is no end. So what does that mean for transcendence? Well, Gödel showed that former proofs have limits, obviously, but he also showed that, and here's a kicker, truth is larger than proof. Right? If you can recognize a true but unprovable statement, then you're seeing truth from outside the formal system. That's transcendence happening in thought. So paradoxically, Gödel mathematically demonstrates that transcendence is real. He didn't make it unreachable. He proved its necessity. Wow. Well, what about metaphysics? Is it real or imaginary? Well, depends on what you mean by real, of course. If we mean empirically measurable, like mass or voltage, then no, metaphysics isn't real that way. But if you mean structurally necessary for thinking itself, then yes, metaphysics is very real. And here's why. Physics describes what exists and how it behaves. Metaphysics asks why existence itself is intelligible at all. You can't even formulate physics without metaphysical assumptions that the universe is consistent, that causes have effects, that numbers and logic correspond to reality. These aren't proven by experiments. They're conditions that make experiments even possible. So that's metaphysics at work. Metaphysics isn't making stuff up. It's the reflection on what can't be reduced to stuff. So logic and math at the edge of infinity. It's accurate when we can say, look, standard logic and math break down at infinity. All right, we get that. But that breakdown reveals something. Instead of stopping our inquiry, it reveals something more, right? When Cantor hit the paradox of the set of all sets, it wasn't the end of mathematics. It created set theory and the idea of transfinite numbers. So each time logic meets its limit, it extends itself by inventing a richer framework. That's what hate means in this book, by transcendence. Reason expanding through its own contradictions. That's how the contradictions are swallowed. But the framework is expanded. So this isn't made up. We're following reason to where reason opens into something larger than itself. That's what we're doing here. Now, the hierarchy of knowledge comes in layers. At the level of physics, we have measurement and math. And this is the behavior of matter and energy, right? But this needs metaphysical assumptions. In mathematics, you have pure logical form, and there are abstract relations. That's what it knows, but you can't prove its own consistency, according to Gödel. In philosophy and metaphysics, the tool we have is to reflect on being and knowing, but what it knows is why there is order, why there is meaning, why there is intelligibility, but it can't be tested by experiment. And in the mystical contemplative, the tool is the direct intuition of unity. What it knows is the whole as whole. But its limit is it can't be formalized. Each level includes and transcends the one below it. Metaphysics sits where logic turns back on itself and asks, what makes logic possible? That's not fantasy. It's inquiry into the very conditions of reality. So what do we do with this? Well, you don't throw away math and logic. We use them until they point beyond themselves. See, Gödel shows the ladder has no top rung. And Cantor shows infinity can't be completed. And Haidt says that very incompleteness is the signature of the infinite itself. So metaphysics isn't a retreat into imagination. It's the recognition that reason has a horizon, and the horizon is real even if you can't cross it. But it's there. So, what's all that mean? All right, let's word it this way. We can't prove transcendence because proof belongs to the finite. But every proof, by its limit, reveals transcendence. The infinite isn't a thing to measure. It's the space that makes measurement possible. So, when you feel that tension, are we just making this stuff up? That's exactly the right feeling. It means you've reached the boundary. This boundary where thinking begins to sense what lies beyond its own framework. So here's the takeaway. Gödel says logic points beyond itself. Cantor says number points beyond itself. Haidt says being points beyond itself. So consciousness recognizes that beyond and it names it transcendence. That is metaphysics. Reason encountering its own source. So each time that logic meets its limit, it extends itself by inventing a richer framework. Well, that's what William Byers, in his book, How Mathematicians Think, said about mathematics paradoxes. They just totally, brutally contradict, and they cannot be true. So he shows example after example after example, a way is found around them or through them, and inevitably a new mathematics is discovered. There appears to be no end to this process. That's the same insight that Haidt in The Scandal of Reason is dramatizing, only he lifts it up onto the metaphysical scale, not a mathematical one. But the same thing is in mathematics. Here's what Byers observed in How Mathematicians Think. It's by Princeton University Press, 2007. It's a great book. Boy, it's a mind opener. Here's what he argues. Paradox isn't a failure of reasoning, it's the engine. Paradox is the engine of reasoning. So whenever mathematics runs into an absolute contradiction, something that cannot possibly be true and yet cannot be possibly dismissed, mathematicians do not throw the subject away. They invent a new framework. And in that new framework, the paradox dissolves and a larger order appears. Yeah, and he gives examples, negative numbers. Do you remember in grade school when we all first ran into this? You can't have -3 apples. That's just pure bunk. And yet, this led to algebraic closure. So how about the imaginary numbers, right? The square root of -1, right? Well, this opened the complex plane and modern analysis. How about Cantor's infinite sets? This broke the ancient law that wholes must be greater than their parts, birthed set theory and topology, new mathematics. How about Gödel's incompleteness? This shattered the hope of perfect formal consistency, but it launched modern logic, computer science. You're looking at one on the monitor right now, listening to me, and the philosophy of self-reference. Each contradiction forced mathematics to transcend itself, to create a language that could contain what had seemed impossible. Bayer calls this process the dialectic of ambiguity. So Haidt is applying the same pattern universally all the way out to and including being itself. Every finite system, a body, a mind, a cosmos, eventually confronts a contradiction it cannot solve inside itself. The resolution is never inside the old logic. It's a qualitative leap to a richer order, and he calls that transcendence. Just as new mathematics emerged from paradox, new modes of being and knowing emerge from the friction of opposites. So, in both Bayer's and Haidt's view, contradiction isn't the end of truth, it's truth in transformation. This is an open-ended horizon, is what we're witnessing here. There does rightly appear to be no final system. There's no ultimate mathematics that we've ever found. There's no ultimate theory of everything, because every closure reveals its own boundary. In mathematics, leads to new axioms and new geometries. In physics, it leads to new frameworks. We went from Newton to Einstein to quantum to strings. In consciousness, it leads to new forms of reflection and awareness. So that endless self-revision is what infinity looks like when it flows through thought. So here's a philosophical echo now. This is why Hegel spoke of the self movement of the concept. This is why Nicholas of Cusa said the maximum and minimum coincide, and why Gödel's theorem feels like a spiritual statement as much as a logical one. Every closed totality contains the seed of its own transcendence. Wow. So when we see Bayer's new mathematics born from paradox, we're seeing the same structure that Haidt himself calls the infinite finitizing itself by degrees. See, each new system is a finite crystallization of the infinite's power to surpass limits. That's what we're seeing. And there's no finiteness to new systems that are coming about either. Even that's infinite, and they all have to surpass themselves. That's self-recursion. I mean, it's in plain words. Okay, let's try to reword this. Paradox is the crack where the light gets in. Each time reason meets an impossibility, it does not die, it evolves. And the endless creation of new mathematics is the infinite thinking through us. We're involved. We're part of it. We are the finite expression of the infinite being particularized. We are the universe. And mythological scholar Joseph Campbell said that was the purpose of myths. Of all things here, it's to open you up to transcendence. The stories, the myths, the stuff that's supposed to be fake is the ultimate ground of reality to open you up to transcendence. And we ignore it because of our stupid, wrong-headed, empirical scientific definitions that, oh, that's not real, it's just myth. We've been lied to, and we don't bother to find the truth. The myth is the truth, and it's pointing you to transcendence. Once you get that, you'll appreciate my esoteric series more, because I'm going through a lot of the stories and the myths to show you that the ancient mysteries are in there. And we can tap into those and learn how to transcend our own selves into becoming divine. Just like the books of Enoch say about Enoch. What do you think that story's there for? To show it to him 2,000 years ago, but that can't possibly happen for us? No, not at all. We now have been able to connect 3 domains, actually, and these are usually kept apart. We've got the mathematics, we've got the mythology, the stories, and we've got the metaphysics. And every one of them describe the same movement. You have contradiction, you have breakthrough, you have transcendence. Contradiction leads to breakthrough, breakthrough leads to transcendence. That's the mysteries. And it's everywhere. So here's the core idea. So in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and that's one of Campbell's most popular, it's famous. Probably not as good as The Power of Myth, because he was interviewing live with Bill Moyers, and Moyers was sensational. So here's what Campbell said. He said, every genuine myth follows a hero journey pattern. So the hero leaves the known world. He confronts impossible trials, contradictions, paradoxes, etc. St. George and the Dragon. Oh, that's just a story. Whoa, hold on. Slow down here. There's something eternally divine in, just those stories. Alice in Wonderland, Shakespeare, you name it. Rabelais. Yeah. So the hero leaves the known world. He confronts impossible trials or paradoxes. He dies to his old self, and he is reborn into a larger reality. Hello, J.R.R. Tolkien, and thank you for showing us the way. The cycle's not about literal monsters. Don't literalize the symbols. Campbell warns us about that too. Don't concretize the symbols. They're pointing you towards something. It's about the mind meeting its limits. The dragon, the labyrinth, the abyss. King Arthur and the quest for the Holy Grail, right? These are symbols of logical or existential contradiction, and crossing them, solving them, is the transcendence, right? So Campbell called myth a metaphor transparent to transcendence. His job is to break the frame of ordinary reason so that consciousness can leap into the wider order of being. That's the whole point of the myths. That's the whole point of so many of the children's fairy tales. So mathematics does the same thing. What Byers and Gödel and Haidt describe in logic is the same architecture in all of these different, really different disciplines. Myth, you have the seeker of truth, the hero. The paradox of life and death, and the return transformation is wisdom and rebirth, right? So the domain is mathematics, the hero is the intellect, The threshold monster is impossible equation or contradiction, but the return and transformation is a new mathematics. The domain of metaphysics is the finite mind. The hero is the finite mind. The threshold, the monster, is the infinite that the finite mind cannot contain. And the return transformation is the awareness of transcendence. Each system meets a wall that it can't cross from within. The monster is always the contradiction that logic can't slay. So the victory is to die into a larger logic. Christ on the cross dies to the mortal logic and transforms into the immortal logic and ascends after he visits the spirits in prison while he was dead. I've done a video on that. So this is the theme. The mathematical revolution itself is a hero's journey of thought. There's a deeper pattern, though, and that's the threshold of the known. So both Campbell and Beyer, the mythologist and the mathematician, they're describing the same universal rhythm. Okay, so you have order, that's a stable framework, it's a known world, it's a consistent theory. You have disruption, a paradox that violates that order. Damn it, man, I hate it when that happens. Life happens when you're making plans type idea, right? Dang it, it's a disruption. And then you have the disintegration, the crisis. Oh, crap, the system fails. The hero dies. What? The hero can't die? But transcendence is a new principle emerges that includes the old one as a special case. And then you have the return. The new vision re-enters the world as myth, mathematics, or revelation. Every scientific revolution and every mythic intuition, an initiation, they replay this pattern. This is the mysteries. And they're still here and they're still going on in every single one of us if we learn how to become transparent to transcendence. It's the cosmos thinking itself forward through us, in us. We have to find our boundary, our horizon, our limit, and transcend it. Our mortality is not it. Death is not final. That's the horizon. We have to learn how to transcend beyond that. So why this works psychologically? Because he drew heavily on Jung. Everybody knows that about Campbell. The unconscious produces symbols that hold contradictions. The conscious mind can't integrate. Yeah, we get that. So we face those consciously, right? And what that does is it helps us transcend our previous identity. That's the books of Enoch. That's the books of Tolkien. Come on, gray Gandalf, white Gandalf. It's right there, man. So mathematical paradoxes do the same thing for the intellect. They hold incompatible truths until a higher synthesis is born. And that synthesis is a virgin because it's never been done before. But that virgin gives birth to a whole new way of living. Does that ring a bell? That's why myth feels alive. And that's why math feels inexhaustible. Both of them are languages of transformation. And the common message is when the old order of understanding collapses, under contradiction, do not despair. The crack in the doorway is the doorway. The crack is the doorway to the infinite. Myth dramatizes that as descent and resurrection. I've made videos on this. I'm not kidding. And they're beautiful. The messages in them are beautiful if you'll take the time to watch them and watch them again. Mathematics performs it as the discovery of a richer framework. That's how that handles it. Metaphysics names it transcendence. We become transparent to that. We get it. The light bulb turns on. The soul expands. That's not just a metaphor or kind of a nice poetic set of words. The soul expands. That's the idea of transparent to transcendence. So Campbell's hero, Byers' mathematician, Hate's seeker of the infinite. These are all the same figure traveling through different worlds. Hate is the philosopher mathematician of transcendence, the one showing how constants and limits reveal the infinite within the finite. Campbell, by contrast, he is the mythic interpreter. He's the one who translates the same structure into story and symbol for the psyche. The key is not to collapse them into each other either, but to show that both of them are describing the same ascent, just from different vantage points. Hate is the intellect climbing toward being, and Campbell is the human soul walking the hero's road. But they're the same thing. So with the idea that every closure reveals its own boundary now, here's what we can do. We can ask, is this why reason has an end of meaning and even language cannot give us total understanding and knowledge? Is there also an end to reason and knowledge, empirical knowledge? It simply cannot get us to the ultimate truth, can it? See, here we're touching the very limit where philosophy and mathematics and theology all start pointing at the same horizon here. Every closure reveals its own boundary. That phrase means whenever we build a complete system of logic, of language, of mathematics, of science, of religion, we discover something it cannot contain. Gödel proved it formally for mathematics. Wittgenstein realized it for language. He said, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And the mystics experienced it in the contemplation. The moment you try to define the divine, it slips beyond the definition. Every time. Each system is like a circle that can be drawn wider, but it never encloses the whole horizon. So why does this happen? Reason and language depend on distinction. This versus that. Subject versus object, true versus false. Something's distinguished from something else. This glass bottle as opposed to this metal bottle. But ultimate reality, the infinite, it's not divided. When you reach what includes both sides of every distinction, the tools that rely on division stop working. Obviously, that doesn't make reason worthless. No, it just means reason is a ladder. And at some point, you've climbed as high as logic can take you. And then, as Wittgenstein said, you must throw the ladder away. What happens at that limit? Well, mathematically, the system becomes incomplete. Linguistically, words circle something they can't name, and that's the mystical silence, the poetry. Philosophically, reason recognizes the ground it stands on, but it can't analyze it any further. And spiritually, this is experienced as awe, surrender, illumination, call it whatever you want. The end of reason is not ignorance, it's openness. This is where thinking stops controlling and it starts contemplating. See, empirical knowledge, the science, the observation, our experiments, etc. This is magnificent for describing how things work within the measurable world. But it cannot, by its own method, answer why there is a world at all, or what makes truth and beauty and meaning possible. That doesn't make science wrong. It's limited by design. It explains the finite within the finite, not the infinite that makes the finite possible. So, yeah, empirical knowledge cannot reach ultimate truth because ultimate truth isn't an object to measure. It's the condition that allows measurement to exist. So, reason is a ladder, its top rung touches mystery. Language is a mirror. At some depth, it reflects what it cannot describe. Empirical knowledge is a map. Infinity is the territory that it cannot contain. And the end of learning is not failure. It's the doorway through which wisdom enters. So yeah, when we feel, that swimming feeling, the lightness and the dizziness in studying infinity like this, that's exactly the moment where thought senses that the infinite isn't an equation, it's a presence. So can physics explain the infinite? Not in the way science explains gravity or chemistry, no. Metaphysics can't explain the infinite, but it can indicate it. It can show that every finite explanation presupposes something beyond itself. What metaphysics does is trace the outline of the horizon. It begins inside reason and analysis. It follows those tools until they point beyond themselves. It says there must be more than this because otherwise even this would not be possible. That gesture, acknowledging and turning toward the beyond, is already a kind of participation in transcendence. So metaphysics doesn't explain the infinite, it awakens awareness of it. And what does go to the higher plane mean? The higher plane. This isn't a different location somewhere else. No, it's a different mode of knowing. We have empirical knowing, through our senses, our measurements, and our concepts. That's empirical knowing. We have metaphysical knowing through reason and reflecting on our own limits. And then you have transcendent knowing through direct awareness or presence. When metaphysics reaches its own limit, it doesn't stop thinking. It turns its light back onto the thinker. That's partly what makes metaphysics so fun, right? That shift from object to awareness itself, that's what they call the higher plane. That's the higher plane. Absolutely. So, what is it about becoming instead of just thinking and reasoning? How does that work? I mean, eventually, you're becoming something else through just your thinking. And how does that work? Well, every time you think, you stand apart from what you think about. Fair enough? Subject here, object there. Subject here, object there. To become being means the separation collapses. You're no longer looking at existence. You are aware as existence. So it isn't an act of reasoning. It's an act of presence. You still have a mind, yes, but it rests instead of reaching. Philosophers and mystics have described this many ways. Plotinus says, the vision is not by the eye looking, but by the soul becoming what it sees, right? Eckhart says, the eye with which I see God is the eye with which God sees me. That's deep. Spinoza says the human mind is a mode of God's thinking. That's pretty good too. Heidegger said, let being be, not grasped, but allowed. And then the Eastern Advaita, tat tvam asi, thou art that, meaning you're one with the Creator. So mentally possible, yeah. People have experienced and described it, but it's not reached by more thinking. It's what happens when thought fulfills its purpose and it becomes transparent to what it's about. That's how that works. So the transition from reasoning to being, your reasoning is you're analyzing, you're comparing, you're naming, oh, there's a book, there's a lid, here's a desk, stuff like that. Then reflection, you're realizing all reasoning takes place in being. And then recognition, you're sensing that the awareness doing the reasoning is itself part of what it seeks. And then the presence is where the gap closes. There's no outside anymore. You recognize you're it. You are the universe. So that fourth stage is what hate means by transcendence. It's not mental annihilation. It's the quiet realization that you were never separate from being in the first place. And why does this matter? The goal is not to stop thinking forever. That's not the goal. Some people miss this. It is to see thinking as one expression of being, not the whole of it. Science and philosophy and art and prayer, all of these become ways the infinite looks at itself through finite eyes, through our eyes. Us looking out at the world and the cosmos is the infinite looking at itself. That's very fascinating. Science explains the finite within the finite. That's true. Metaphysics shows why explanation itself points beyond. That's true. We've seen that tonight. Transcendence is when awareness becomes identical with what it always sought. So in short, metaphysics does not conquer the infinite. It bows to it. And in that bow, thought becomes being. Not by ceasing to think, but by realizing it was the infinite thinking all along. Haidt said we must move beyond our limitations, or else what is a metaphor? That is a great pun. Meta is beyond, above, after. Forein is to carry, to bear. So a metaphor literally carries meaning beyond the literal. And metaphysics tries to carry thought beyond the physical. Both reach for something the finite mind can't grasp directly. Metaphor does it through imagery and analogy. Metaphysics does it through concepts and reflection. But they're twins. They both show that language is always reaching past itself. Why this pun is philosophically perfect is because Thomas Haidt and many before him used that play on words to make a serious point when we talk about being, infinity, God. Every statement is a meta is for. A carrying of the mind beyond is beyond what can be literally said. That's what hate is doing with mathematics and paradox. He's turning much of itself into a kind of a metaphor that transcends its own domain. Math, physics, mind, everything's beyond its own domain. So that's why Plato wrote in myth. It's why Dante and Shakespeare and Blake and Campbell all treated images as vehicles of truth. They knew that when reason hits the horizon, metaphor is the only craft that can keep sailing. It doesn't give us a final answer. It lets us see beyond answers. So the pun is justified. It actually contains the whole structure that I've been unpacking tonight. Every act of understanding is a carrying beyond. It's a meta is for. It's a metaphor that points to what thought itself can't even fully hold. That's when you're understanding stuff, right? So this all is why scientific reductionism can't be final. It's not the final way to truth. It absolutely cannot get us there to final truth. The standard model of physics about particles and their relationships can't be the ultimate truth either. Yet again, string theory can't be either. And we actually have no way to even test string theory, let alone even glimpse if it's real or not. We just don't have the tools right now. So whatever that might mean, the ultra small level, and that doesn't mean reductionism is false. No. It means explaining complex things in terms of simpler interacting parts. Oh, I'm just about there. Okay, I can keep going. It's extraordinarily successful for predicting and manipulating phenomena inside the measurable world. Chemistry reduced to physics actually works. Cell biology reduced to molecular interaction actually does work. And electronics reduced to quantum mechanics. It works within its realm. That's the key. The finite within the finite. Reductionism is unmatched, but it can't be final because it depends on a framework of assumptions that it can't justify. It presumes a world made of separable parts that behave by stable laws. It presumes measurement is possible and meaningful. It presumes mathematics can describe reality. These aren't results of reductionism. They're conditions that make reductionism possible. Once you ask why such laws or such mathematical coherence exist at all, you've left physics and you've entered metaphysics. So sure, reductionism can't be the best way to truth in the ultimate sense, because it can only ever analyze within a given system, never explain why the system or its laws exist. And the current particle model, the standard model of particle physics, is spectacularly accurate for experiments up to the energies we can reach. But it's incomplete. It doesn't include gravity, dark matter, dark energy, and many of its parameters are inserted by hand rather than being derived. That doesn't make it false. It just means it's incomplete. It works within a certain range of the real. It's a partial map is all it is. Same thing with string theory. Mathematically, it's elegant. Empirically, we can't even test it yet. So the energy requires trillions of times of the energy beyond what our accelerators can achieve. So it's speculative mathematical framework awaiting an empirical handle, but that doesn't mean it's worthless. It might eventually lead to insights that can be tested, but it does show the limit of empirical inquiry, and that's the point. Every scientific model works astonishingly well within its scope. It contains questions that it cannot answer from inside itself. It eventually meets a paradox, and this is going to demand a wider framework, and we have been providing that as we meet the paradox and as we have the capability. Absolutely. That rhythm, success, limit, transcendence, well, that's exactly the same pattern that we've been following through mathematics and metaphysics. Science, too, participates in that spiral of ever richer understanding. Empirical truth is instrumental. It shows what works. It shows what correlates. It shows what can be measured. Metaphysical truth is ontological. It asks, what being makes the measurable possible? They aren't enemies, they're layers. Reductionism handles the mechanics of reality. Metaphysics gestures toward the meaning of reality. So, in short, reductionism is powerful, but it's not final. Physics describes patterns within the cosmos. It does not explain why patterns or cosmos exist at all. String theory may be an attempt at a deeper map, but even if it succeeds, it will still rest on the untestable assumptions that being itself is mathematically expressible. So our instinct is correct here. Science is a magnificent part of truth, but it's not the truth. The horizon it approaches is the same horizon that mathematics, philosophy, and myth also point toward. Reductionism always depends on a framework of assumptions that it cannot justify, but all scientific theories do that. What makes a good scientific theory is that they show you its own assumptions and limits. That's Donald Hoffman's point of view, the neuroscientist. Every successful scientific theory rests on assumptions it can't prove, and the best scientists are the ones who acknowledge those assumptions and show you the limitations. So, our sensory and cognitive systems did not evolve to show us objective reality, according to Hoffman. They evolved to show us a user interface, a simplified survival-oriented display. That's what this is. Everything around us, no matter how far out you see, it's an interface. Evolution does not favor veridical perception. It favors fitness payoffs. In other words, what we perceive as space and time and object, even physical particle, it's a model tuned for usefulness, but not a literal snapshot of what actually is. So that model is what science works inside. So Hoffman, Gödel, Byers, Haidt, among many other colleagues, are all describing the same epistemological pattern. Build a system that works within a framework, encounter its boundary, and then recognize that the boundary itself implies something beyond. That recognition is transcendence in intellectual form. So if the physical world rests on dimensionless relational numbers such as the constants, then reality is not fundamentally stuff, it's form. Relation, ratio, harmony. That's the Pythagorean intuition reborn in modern physics. So in that light, the fine structure constant, the 134, that's the gateway constant mathematically. That links the quantum, Planck's constant, and the speed of light in Einstein's relativity, and the electrical charge in quantum, E. So phi is the pattern constant. It links self-similarity because it's the golden spiral. It links proportion and organic growth, as I showed you on the cover of this nifty little book here. Both describe order without substance, and that's exactly what the infinite looks like when it expresses itself as a finite universe. See, this is why materialists grow uncomfortable. If you admit that the universe runs on pure relations, numbers that have no units, yet govern everything, then the physical is already mathematical. And mathematics is already non-physical. That undermines hard materialism. So it's no wonder they fight this stuff. Einstein himself said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. See, the world shouldn't be written in numbers at all, yet it is. And when those numbers are unitless, they become almost Platonic. They belong in the realm of eternal truths, not just experimental facts. The mystical undertone from number to harmony, when hate says that the alpha and the phi participate in the infinite's self-expression, he's saying the universe expresses its intelligibility through relational constants. The ratios that hold the atoms of our bodies together, and the atoms of the world, and the planets, and the stars, and the suns out in the cosmos. The ratios that shape galaxies, they're both finite echoes of an infinite pattern of coherence. So now, in that sense, the mystical dimension isn't unscientific. It's simply recognizing that relations and not things form the true fabric of the cosmos. Science describes the pattern. Mysticism contemplates the source of the pattern. And we have a legitimate philosophical point here, whether you're religious or secular. The fact remains the universe runs on mathematical relations that are not themselves physical objects. Mathematics has no mass, no charge, no energy, yet its structures govern all of those. Well, that's the precise sense in which the immaterial, whether form, ratio, or number, structures the material. That's not mysticism. It's the ontological puzzle at the root of all of our theoretical science. Why does mathematics work so unreasonably well at describing the real world? When someone like Haidt calls that a gateway, he's referring to that puzzle, the jump from equation to existence, not to a creed. No. And where do the religious thinkers often step in? Well, they may take that gap and say, because the laws are immaterial, they hint at a mind or logos behind matter. And that's an interpretation. It's not physics, but it's permissible metaphysical reading, just as a strict materialist may interpret the same fact as the universe simply is mathematical, no mind needed. Well, the data are neutral. The metaphysics is your framework, right? So in short, physicists say the fine structure constant is the ratio that quantifies electromagnetic coupling. This is how electrons stay and move in the atom. That's what the fine structure constant is from a physicist's point of view, okay? A philosopher says the fine structure constant is an example of where explanation hits an epistemic ceiling. The mystic says the fine structure constant is the symbol of harmony between physics, matter, and mind. So the gateway between physics and metaphysics, this is shorthand for here is where quantitative explanation ends and qualitative meaning begins. That's not religion sneaking in. It's simply the recognition that some questions remain after the math is done. That's what we're seeing here. And here's the profound point. In an infinite system, every ratio, every resemblance, every echo participates in the larger whole. There's no outside of infinity from which to call one thing accidental and another thing intended. That's not how it works. In that sense, all patterns are aspects of the one pattern. See, that's the metaphysical or the symbolic view, the Pythagorean Platonic side of mathematics. So it treats numerical harmonies not as predictions to test, but as signatures of coherence, qualitative, not quantitative meaning. So yes, in the infinite, nothing is just a coincidence. But in the finite practice of science, we still need a filter, or else every pretty number consequence becomes a law. From the infinite standpoint, everything coincides anyway because everything participates in the same totality, right? So Kusa called this the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites. So in that, the difference between the accident and the necessity collapses, right? Because all of it's enfolded in one self-consistent whole. But from within the finite, we still have to discern degrees of coherence to make sense of our world. So science is our friend. Absolutely. It is invaluable in that regard. Otherwise, the world dissolves into pure pattern with no hierarchy of meaning. Science is the art of disciplined restraint, right? Metaphysics is the art of intuitive expansion. Both of these are necessary. One doesn't get a claim priority because it doesn't have priority, either one of them. It's a teamwork. In physics, yes, it's right to call untestable numeric patterns coincidence because that protects rigor in our finite realm. Fundamentally so. In metaphysics, yes, it's equally right to see all patterns participate in the infinite because that protects wonder. Neither one cancels out the other. One preserves truth by narrowing meaning. The other preserves meaning by widening truth. So thanks for watching my Backyard Professor Esoteric Studies. I'm enjoying doing this. I enjoy studying the mysteries, and this has been a big one. I've got a lot more to share with you. I am so excited to be doing this. I have so much joy. I have so much fulfillment with these kinds of topics, and there's so much more yet to share. So I'm going to sign off for now. I will see you soon with more esoteric studies to stimulate your mind, encourage your heart, and why not fulfill your soul? I mean, man, what better way to live, right? I'll catch up to you soon.